Buenas tardes todos. Good evening, class. Thank you very much for joining us this evening for a wonderful evening that's in store for you. And my name is Diane Cheseldine, and I'm the founder of the Distinguished Speaker Series. However, the chair of the series is back there by the sign-up table. That's Mayanne McMurray, and she's the chair, but she left me with this job. But I love this job. I love introducing wonderful speakers, and we have an extraordinary speaker this evening. Before I tell you a little bit about him, I do want to thank the committee of our series for their help, and several members are here this evening. I'd like to thank Media Services, and I'd like to thank our publicity office for the beautiful flyers that they created. Page 2. I had the pleasure of meeting Steven Nightingale earlier this year. I was honored to be invited to be an interlocutor for a presentation which he gave at Sundance Bookstore, and about his recently published book titled Granada, A Pomegranate in the Hand of God. And for those of you studying Spanish, what does Granada mean? Pomegranate. Thank you back there. So it's a wonderful book, and Sundance Bookstore has a table back there if you are interested in purchasing any of his works. He has many works. So that opportunity I had was a wonderful one for me to speak with Steven, who's so knowledgeable about the time period we're going to be talking about tonight, which is one of my passions, medieval Spain. So I am delighted that he is here tonight on our campus to continue the conversation. And Steven is a noted poet, author, and presenter, born in Reno, and on so many topics, but this evening he will be bringing in a lot from that book that I just mentioned to you. But he also has an even more recently published book. Is that on the table back there? Yes, excellent. And so I'm looking forward to reading that as soon as I can get to doing that. So, everybody, broche su cinturón, fasten your seatbelt for a journey back in time to a unique period in the history of Spain. And I introduce you to Mr. Steven Nightingale.
Thank you all for coming. Listen, all of us who write books spend years and years doing them. This book about Granada took me 8 years to write. Of course, I had a 3-year plan. And these are some of the few chances I get to talk with all of you for whom I wrote this book. This book came about because of a move that I made with my wife and daughter to a medieval barrio in the city of Granada in the province of Andalusia. We moved there in 2002. Our daughter was 18 months old. If any of you have children, my advice is, especially young children, my advice is move to Spain because the people of Spain have a helpless affection for children. I mean, within a few days, our daughter was sleeping over at other people's houses, and she wasn't even 2, because she knew that they loved her. It was wonderful. We moved to the Albaicin, and what you're seeing here is a picture of the neighborhood. Now, you're probably looking at that, and you're seeing, where are the roads in the neighborhood? Well, the answer is the roads are all very small. They're lanes. This is a medieval neighborhood that preserves the street pattern of what is basically a 1,000-year-old Arab village. And it's full of gardens because the classic house in this neighborhood is called a carmen, and a carmen simply means a house with a hidden garden. So we settled into one of those houses. It had a name, the very melodious name of Carmen de Nuestra Señora de Carmen de Nuestra Señora, let's call it de la Iluminación. Of course, everybody could use some of that, and so that was one of the reasons we bought the house. But we settled into this area and we fell in love with the neighborhood, and that's why this book came about, is I wanted to try to write a book worthy of some place that had so many beauties and such cumulative beauties that it transformed our lives. I just want to show you a very few images just to give you a sense of the place. This is an image of tile work in the Alhambra. This is the sacred art of Islam is this geometric tile work. It is fascinating. You can stand before one of these walls of tiles and basically go into something like a hypnotic trance, from which you will emerge in a much better mood than you were initially. Oops, my heavens. This is a street in the Albaicin, and that's just about as wide as they get. This is a neighborhood that is not built for cars to be happy. It's built for people to be happy. And that is one volume out of a 30-volume medical treatise written in the 10th century in Al-Andalus. And it was written by a man named Al-Zawadi. And he was the inventor of the original form of a lot of the surgical tools that we use today. That was one volume out of a 30-volume work. And that's a classic Carmen in the Albaicin. So why is this city worth writing a book on? What I found as I read my way into the history books of this period is that the history was in the process of being recreated, reimagined, refounded in this time in which we live, because it had never been told straight. Even though all the evidence had built up over decades and over centuries that the traditional way we saw Al-Andalus, that period between 711 and 1492, was just fundamentally mistaken. And so I began to read my way into these books, and it was stunning how much the standard view of history that we all learned was in defiance of the facts. And there's a story I want to tell you that illustrates this, and I'm going to tell more stories of this genre a little bit later in the talk. But it's part of a genre of that you find in the Middle East. They're known as the Nasruddin stories. The Nasruddin stories are a genre meant to teach ethics and psychology and spirituality by means of jokes. And so this story goes like this. A man came to Nasruddin, and he wanted to borrow Nasruddin's donkey. And Nasruddin did not want to lend the donkey. So he said, my donkey is just not here. My donkey is in another county. And right then, the donkey hee-hawed out in the stable. And the neighbor said, Nasruddin, you're wrong. The donkey is right there. And Nasruddin says, who are you going to believe, me or the donkey? It's a way, that is a symptomatic joke. It's a classic joke because it shows the way people will do whatever they can to hold to this line of reasoning, this conviction that they have. What kind of a society was Al-Andalus, this great medieval period in Spain? It's 711 to 1492. It was distinguished by the convivencia, a beautiful Spanish word that means living together. And their accomplishments were in the following fields: in mathematics, in astronomy, in botany, in music, in medicine, in philosophy, in agriculture, in commerce, and in sex. Now, does this sound like an advanced civilization to all of you? It was an extraordinary civilization, and we're only now getting a complete picture of it. So what I want to do is I want to touch on some of those accomplishments and give you examples, just so you have a sense of the debt we owe this one country in this one period of time. So let me start with mathematics. You know, we live in a time when every opinion is challenged. It's a time of extreme political contention. Nobody can agree on anything, but I have a proposition of something I hope we can all agree on. Can we agree that the Hindu-Arabic number system is a good thing? Are we down with that? Can we all sign up to that? Well, the question is, how did that number system, which was invented in India and refined and developed in the Arab world, how did that get to Europe? So it could serve as the basis of the Renaissance and the basis of the Enlightenment and the basis of the technological and industrial revolutions. It got to Europe through medieval Spain, through Al-Andalus, through the Arab and Jewish and Christian mathematicians who worked in that period. And so they applied the Hindu-Arabic system to a whole range of practical problems, but they worked so much at it. We all need to remember that those numbers could have taken on any form. The numbers, you know, the form we use to represent the first 10 integers are basically random. But the numbers 0, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 have the form that they do because they were given that form in Al-Andalus. That final form for those numbers was given to them in medieval Spain. Now, when you read history, often you'll find an account that, well, the reason that we had Hindu-Arabic numeration in Europe was because of the Italian mathematician Fibonacci. Well, Fibonacci copied most of the material in the books that he published from the Arab and Hebrew mathematicians of Al-Andalus. So there's this movement of ideas, this movement of understanding out of Al-Andalus into the rest of Europe that provided the foundation for the Renaissance in the most extraordinary way. Averroes, let's touch on philosophy a minute. Averroes was a 12th century philosopher. He wrote books on, and let me take a deep breath here. He wrote books on logic, on medicine. He wrote an encyclopedic compendium of the law. He wrote books on classical Arab music. So in addition to being a lawyer and a physician, he decided, maybe this was just sort of a sidelight, that he would translate and do a commentary on Aristotle and Plato. Those books were foundational in the theology and the education of the Western world. Even Dante could not bear, even though Averroes was a Muslim, to put him in the Inferno. So he put him in the limbo along with Socrates and Homer, I think on the theory that he would have incredibly great company there. Euclid was there. It's great. Limbo was not such a bad place to be. Thomas Aquinas incorporated the ideas of Averroes into his theology. And he was an incredible man. He not only he not only wrote that commentary that was so influential in Europe, but he said something else. He said, in his philosophy, he said, the capacity to reason that we have is a gift from heaven. It's a gift from God, and is our duty as humankind to use the capacity of reason and to follow reason wherever it leads us, because reason will lead us to the truth. So you follow reason, you experiment, you have careful observations of the phenomenal world, and you come to a truth, and you compare that truth with the truth you have from Scripture. And if the truth you arrive at by means of reason does not match the truth that you have by means of Scripture, then it is necessary to reinterpret Scripture. because all truth has some fundamental unity. This was an intellectual bombshell in the history of Europe. It's a declaration of independence for the minds of men and women, because it freed us all. It's really a fundamental idea in the Enlightenment to follow our observations and our calculations and our propositions wherever they may lead us. I showed you some of the surgical instruments of Al-Zawahiri, and he was known as Abul Qasis that was his Latin name. Abul Qasis, he performed spinal surgery. He performed eye surgery. He sutured wounds. He did this is in the 10th century in Cordoba. He did a whole range. He had a whole medical practice that had, as a result, this 30-volume compendium of medical knowledge. It was translated into Latin 5 times. It's a fundamental text in medical history. But certainly, he was the originator of many surgical tools and surgical procedures. And he was also, if you read his commentaries, they're splendid. One idea associated with him is the idea that a person who's suffering would benefit from a gift of flowers, because beauty and healing go together. And then there's the poetry. It's the greatest poetry of medieval Europe by far. Most of the poetry of medieval Europe is intensely doctrinal, whereas the poets, the Hebrew and the Arab, and in some cases the Christian poets of Al-Andalus, wrote poems about love and pleasure and despair and suffering and political controversy and the minute beauties of the natural world and the grandeur and the downfall of all our lives on earth. They wrote poetry that when you read it seems indistinguishable from a lot of modern poetry. And it's the most uplifting and exultant stuff to read. So I'll read you some. Here's a one-liner. The silence of gardens is peace. Here's a quatrain written by a poet named Ibn Gabirol, who wandered all over Spain. He was a theologian, a philosopher, and a poet. He was disfigured by an incredible skin disease and wasn't welcome in many places, and he wrote this quatrain. You who seek my peace, come near and hear the roar of my heart like the sea. If your heart has grown hard, it will soften, faced with the hatred that faces me. There was a Hebrew poet named Abraham ibn Ezra who wrote these very short, very rueful quatrains. And this is one of them. The heavenly spheres and fortune's stars veered off course the day I was born. If I were a seller of candles, the sun would never go down. And here's another fascinating quatrain from a colleague of Abraham ibn Ezra's. As long as a man seeks wisdom, wisdom will have him hold sway over men. But once he thinks it's wearing its mantle, know that it has just been taken from him. It's It's a quatrain about the perils of that kind of self-regard, where you presume you've come into some momentous idea that you and you alone have. It's also related to a Sufi proverb, which is a saint until he knows he is. Which is related to a whole theme that you find in the aforementioned Nasruddin stories. And so this idea that people are just sort of incorrigibly attached to their sense of themselves, so that they find it difficult to see reality in the world, is a theme in those Nasruddin stories. And I'll tell you a few more of those. One time, Nasruddin was in court, and he was in conversation with the king, and the king said, Nasruddin, kings that have conquered as much as I have always have names with God in them. So and so, the God exalted, the God praised, the godly and the miraculous, the God necessary. And he said, Nasruddin, what do you think my title should be? And Nasruddin says, well, how about God forbid? These stories, they're just punctures of situations. And then there's an even shorter one, which is also on the same theme. A man comes to Nasruddin and says, Nasruddin, a terrible thing has happened. Your donkey is missing. Your donkey has been lost. And Nasruddin says, God, thank heaven I wasn't on it at the time. Otherwise, I would have been lost as well. This genre of stories is so interesting because, it's a perfect illustration of this continuous sense that so many of us have of ourselves and nothing else. And there's one last story. Nasruddin was in the court of Tamerlane, the conqueror, and Tamerlane is handing out gifts to everyone, and Nasruddin had recently fallen from favor. And so everyone is opening their gifts, and there are these incredible robes sewn with gold and silver threads and inlaid with jewels. And Nasruddin's opens his, and it's a donkey blanket. And he says immediately, I want all of you to be my witness. How much Tamerlane loves me. He has given me the clothes off his own back. I want to touch very briefly on an art which is at once a present art and a historical art in Andalusia and especially in Granada, and that's the art of flamenco singing. If you have not heard the raw, pure, unreserved, extraordinary, classical flamenco singing, then just get on a plane as soon as you can and go to Granada. I'll tell you where to go. It's an art form that's been developed over hundreds of years. It was a favorite of Garcia Lorca, the extraordinary poet of 20th century Spain. And I want to just read you one passage that Lorca wrote. Lorca wrote this. He was in his early 20s, and he had sponsored in the Albaicin a flamenco contest, and people walked barefoot 70 miles to participate in this thing. It was the first of its kind. Lorca wrote this: "It is deep, truly deep, deeper than any well, deeper than the seas of the world, deeper even than the hearts of those that create it presently, and the voices of those who sing it, because it is almost infinite. It comes from a faraway people, crossing beyond the cemetery of the years. It comes from the first tear and the first kiss. It is the song of night. It has nothing but night, night shot through with stars. Flamenco singing is like that. We should have a flamenco party here in TMCC, don't you think? You know, I'll bring the music. Unless we could get a real flamenco singer. So let's talk about Al-Andalus and sex. Some of you may have had I'm not sure whether it's a fortune or a misfortune to read in medieval Christian theology. But those of us who have, it is remarkable, this strain of disdain and contempt for women that is contained in much of the writing there. Those writings form the backdrop of what was the medieval Christian thinking about sexuality. And I'm just going to touch very briefly on some of the ideas that were in circulation in these writings. A lot of them go back to Aristotle. Aristotle, as you may remember, thought that a woman was a kind of a defective man. And this idiotic idea got carried on. St. Paul, for example, thought that the natural love we have of another person, that inclination to cherish another person physically, was a distraction from the love of God, and therefore should be ruled out. St. Paul was the one who penned the famous line, "It is better to marry than burn." Nice, hopeful thought. Jerome thought that Saint Jerome, I hate calling them saints. Let's just call him Jerome. Jerome thought that that sexuality was fundamentally unclean, because the only embrace that counted was the embrace of the soul by Jesus. Now, Origen, he took this a step further. He thought that sexuality was filthy, and he thought that even in marriage, it was to be avoided at all costs, and that a woman who was married was essentially a prostitute for one man. Now, Origen was so convinced that sexuality was a bad thing that he went to be castrated, which I think is a rather extreme move on behalf of one's convictions. And then Augustine, of course, you find Augustine kind of musing about whether women have souls at all. Now, these ideas were in circulation, and as a result, this was part of the fundamentalist Catholic teaching of the day, and so it was sex within marriage should be infrequent, it should be without pleasure, and it should be only for the purposes of procreation. And so when could you engage in the love of your mate? Well, you couldn't do it on Sundays, because that was out. That was a holy day. And then, of course, saints' days, you couldn't do it on saints' days either. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever looked at the Catholic calendar and seen how many saints' days there are. But really, by the time, you get through all the saints, it kind of rules out most of the days of the year. It's amazing that the population continued to increase. So the question is, was there another view? There was another view, and it is taken from an extraordinary manuscript written by a Muslim who was Spanish, who was expelled from Spain in 1609, and he wrote this in Spanish in Tunisia. And the manuscript, which was discovered at the Biblioteca Nacional in Madrid, the manuscript is called the Kamasutra espanol. And there is nothing like it in the Spanish language. This is what it's a very short manual, and here's what it claims. Here's what it proposes as the reality of the sexual bond, that women have an equal and wholehearted and necessary right to the whole wide range of sexual pleasures, just as a man does. And that, in fact, it is part of the obligations and the joys of a marriage for a man to make sure that his wife enjoys those pleasures. That, in fact, for a man to devote himself to the pleasures of the one he loves in all their prolongation and detail and variety was something bound up with the heart of life. The Kamasutra espanol has lots of very explicit recommendations about this, and I recommend the text to all of you. I don't have enough time to go into the every single detail. But it's something that is, the writer goes so far as to inform female readers of the text that if their husband is not giving them sufficient amorous attention because he's spending too much time in prayer, should go to the imam so the imam can remind him of what his husbandly duties really are. But the text goes beyond that, and this touches. This to me is a very moving part of it. The text goes beyond that because it says that the pleasures that we have in love, that wholehearted and generous and experimental and open-hearted devotion to one another, in those pleasures, there's not just a physical rapture, but there is an awakening of soul, so that our joys are a part of and fated to be our joys are a necessary introduction to another and a better world. It's our chance to have a sense of the divine within us and a divine that we may encounter as we move through our life and our death. And so it presents a picture of sexual love which is completely absent from medieval Europe. Very beautiful, very clear, very forceful. He talks about sexual love as being all a flourishing and a deliverance that brings us home to a kind of beauty that we can't have any other way. This in medieval Spain. Don't let anybody ever tell you they weren't forward-thinking in medieval Spain. So I would like to close this account, this very brief account of Al-Andalus, on a joyful note and tell you that these attitudes persisted throughout the history of Spain. They did not. They came to an end in 1492. When Ferdinand and Isabel conquered Granada in 1492, the first thing they did was expel the Jews from Spain. The second thing they did was begin the ethnic cleansing of the Muslim population. And they were finally expelled in 1609. A fundamentalist model of Christianity was imposed upon Spain, and it was enforced by the Spanish Inquisition, which is useful to read about because it was the model for lots of other forms of political oppression and political control that we still see in the world today. Garcia Lorca, the poet, who was so interested in Arabic and Persian poetry, was so devoted to flamenco, and was so supportive of civil rights and freedom of expression and education for women. In 1936, at the beginning of the Civil War, was taken up into the hills above Granada and shot to death. He was one of the leading writers in the Hispanic world. Not just known in Spain, he was known worldwide. He was probably better known than any other Spanish writer except for Cervantes. And it's a lesson. It's almost a teaching story. Once that kind of once a country turns away from that deep diversity, the deep diversity of the convivencia that produced one of the most extraordinary and one of the most advanced cultures of the Mediterranean, once a country turns away from that, and the kind of uniformity and cruelty and violence, including the use of torture, becomes mainstream, contempt becomes mainstream in a country, it's very hard to root it out. Spain fell into a kind of a historical funk that they did not awaken from until 1975 with the death of Spanish fascism and Francisco Franco. Today, walking down the streets of Granada, you cannot go 10 feet without seeing the face of Garcia Lorca. It's the most extraordinary thing. You can't kill beautiful work. You cannot kill it. The Alhambra which sits on a hill, the finest Moorish palace in the world, is today one of the preeminent places to visit for its beauty and its grace in all of Europe. So Al-Andalus and the spirit of poetry and this spirit of open-heartedness and the exchange among cultures and religions and ideas and philosophies, that has survived. But it had to go underground for almost half a millennium. So I just want to read you the final passage from this book because it summarizes a lot of this story. If anyone wants to be rocked by currents of beauty and infamy, Granada is the place. Every year, over 3 million people visit the Alhambra. Once a gypsy lodging, animal corral, and ammunition dump, it has been resuscitated into the most admired monument in Spain, a place of providential grace and blessing. The Alhambra presents to the world the art and culture of Al-Andalus, which survived a program of extermination and contemptuous neglect. Garcia Lorca has survived his own murder in rambunctious good form. And the Albaicin, our neighborhood, after 5 centuries marked by piecemeal demolition, arson, military invasion, and pillage, is now one of the best places in the world to live. It is one of the best places there will ever be to live. It has been perfected by catastrophe. The streets hold the spirit of cante hondo, flamenco singing. Let history come with death and ruin, and deep song will rise in time with a beauty that cannot be killed. In just this way, the Albaicin rises every day into the sunlight of Andalusia. Thank you. So I'm completely up for questions of any kind, but someone has to ask the first one. Yes.
Okay, well, it reminds me of reading your book. Reminded me of a movie not many years ago, Sky Above and the Mud Below. And I often like reading it, like, where do you park if you own a car? How did they tear up the streets and put in sewers in the, I assume the 19th century? Years before that, they must have used. And did they change the interior of the house to include the water closet? I mean, normal life, the prosaic details of life over the 500 years in the house. Obviously, electricity. I mean, water, sewage.
Yeah,
how did they handle all that?
It's good. It's a good question. What happened was, a lot of Granada was demolished, but the Albaicin was too despised even to bother with flattening it, and it was a bit harder because it was on a hill. And so what happened is it sort of deteriorated, and then people. I mean, most of the houses didn't have heat, and they had a very rudimentary sewer system. Some they had electricity, but it was dicey. And then, but what happened in 1994? And it's a wonderful story. There was this canny group of Spaniards who were associated with UNESCO, and they went to UNESCO and they got the Albaicin declared a World Heritage Site, along with the Alhambra, which had already been declared, of course, years ago. Hundreds of millions of euros flowed from the European Union into the Albaicin. And because the building codes were very strict, you couldn't change the facade. If you're going to build a house, it was white plaster. There was just continuous interior physical improvement. And so between 1994 and today, the place is unimaginably different, but you can't tell from the outside. It's like when someone is, learns something and they're transformed from within. It's almost like a metaphor for some, resurgence of soul in a person, after which they're a completely different person. This is a completely different neighborhood, and it looks the same. It's very, it's very funny. But they did it, and they're still our neighbor just down below us finished their renovation last year, so it's ongoing. Other questions? Yes.
I forgot you actually looked at it, but you mentioned that the writer of the Kamasutra was exiled in Indonesia.
Right. No, it wasn't. Good question, though. It wasn't. It was because he was Muslim. Well, it was actually he was exiled in 1609, and notes that he went to Tunisia, and in Tunisia he wrote this book in Spanish that somehow found its way into the Biblioteca Nacional. But what's interesting is that not only did he write it in Spanish, and have it's a short prose essay basically, but he interleaved the text with what? With the sonnets of Lope de Vega, a Spanish writer. So he had memorized sonnets of Lope de Vega while he lived in Spain, and then he reproduced them, incorporated into the manuscript. So you're reading along, and then the manuscript sort of breaks off into a Spanish sonnet. But it's like it's the sonnet has come into exotic uses like that. I mean, think of some of the compositions of Vivaldi. You have the composition page, and they begin with several sonnets because it was part of the Italian tradition. Anyway. Yes?
I know the Inquisition was quite active in Castilla.
Yeah.
But how active was it in Andalusia?
Very active, very active. And in fact, the sort of regional headquarters for the Inquisition was just at the base of the Albaicin, our neighborhood here. And if you walk literally 3 minutes from our house, you come to two streets. One of them is the Cárcel Baja, and one of them is the Cárcel Alta, the high prison and the low prison. And then you turn around, and in a little square, and you find yourself in the Placeta de la Cruz Verde, the Plaza of the Green Cross. The Green Cross was a symbol of the Inquisition. So it was as insidious and diabolical and infernal a human institution that has ever been invented. I mean, I hesitate to call it good news, but it is good news. The good news is they kept the most copious records. I mean, if you want to read an account of everything they did, you can read it, because of course they were sure they were acting on the side of God on earth in the last days, before the final redemption. It's really, I mean, I'm not really subject to much depression, but after spending about 4 months reading about the Inquisition, I decided that I needed, a lift. So I had to take some desperate measures. What other questions are there? Yeah.
If you said this, I missed it, but why exactly did you go to that area in the first place? And you still maintain a residence there?
Yeah, the house that's in the book is still our house. We still have it. And what we did is I had always wanted to move abroad, and but I couldn't ever. There was nobody in my life who wanted to move abroad with me. It's kind of an ancient problem. But finally there was, and then the idea of living in another language, as someone who works in language, is irresistible to me. So and we wanted our daughter to have the chance to be bilingual. She was 18 months old, so that was just as much her first language as English. And so I love the idea of that kind of irreversible and risky change in life. We just uprooted ourselves, sold our cars, packed up our books, and headed off to a new life. And it changes you because there's some way you have to recreate yourself. And I felt like that happened there. I mean, to this day, more than one person says that in a sort of classic case of some extreme schizophrenia, that I am a completely different person in Spanish. So anyway.
So why did you choose that place?
The reason that we chose the Albaicin is that it's just so inevitably and incorrigibly beautiful. I mean, we looked at Cordoba and we looked at Sevilla, but when we walked into the Albaicin, literally, it took us 12 seconds to decide to live there. I mean, you walk into that and it's, that you can live a life there that you've never lived before and may never have a chance to live again. And I think if any of you walked into the Albaicin, you would have that same feeling. So it's just, it's the power of the place. You have a follow-up? Yeah.
So you wanted to go to a Spanish-speaking country.
Right.
And what did you do there professionally? I mean, were you an instructor, an author?
Well, I was writing, and I I have a day job in venture capital, but I can do a lot of my work over the internet. And in the Albaicin, it's a labor of Hercules to get a kitchen cabinet, but a high-speed internet connection, no problem. So listen, if any of you want to go to Granada, a local now. And if you have a chance to go and study there and learn Spanish, the Centro de Lenguas Modernas, which is right in the middle of the city, is an incredible school. And there's students there from all over the world. There's students there from all the countries of Europe, And there's students from Japan. We were in Granada with a young friend, and she had friends that she still has from hither and yon. So go for it. It's my recommendation. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay, good.
So do you maintain a home in Reno as well?
No, I don't have a home in Reno. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area now. But once a Nevadan, always a Nevadan. Sure. Yes?
What came over you that in the first couple days there you allowed your daughter to go spend nights with your neighbors? That struck me right away, sorry.
You know, there is what happens in a neighborhood like this is that, see, all of us are used to walking out our front door and we get in our car and we drive to somewhere where our life is. Well, in this neighborhood, you walk out your front door straight into your life. And what happens is you run into your neighbors all the time, literally every day, because they're on the same little streets going to buy groceries or whatever they're doing. And you immediately come to know their children, and their children are at your house, and then, you know, their children want to go home and they want to take your daughter. And there's this bond of trust that builds up very swiftly, and that combined with the natural affection and gentleness and goodwill that the Spanish people in the Albaicin have for little children. It's just they just shine with that affection, and so I mean I have awakened in our house and found children sleeping in it that I didn't even know. And, you know, and then, you know, it gets to be about 9 o'clock in the morning and you hear a knock on the door and it's their parents who were, you know, at our house last night, and I didn't know their children, and their children fell asleep with our daughter or with other children on our couch. And so the parents just go home. It's, you know, it's such a distinct life that I'm stunned. You know, you adapt to it very swiftly because you see the good sense in it, and you see how a life based on that kind of trust changes everything about your daily sense of what's possible. Yes?
In this neighborhood or district, what percentage of people would be expats or non-local?
I would say expats. You mean living there? Less than 10%. 10% at the very most. A lot of people in the Albaicin now rent out rooms, so there are a lot of people staying there who are foreigners. But I mean, when we came in, we bought a house in 5 days, and everybody thought we were, you know, crazy, because it's just not something that people kind of showed up in the Albaicin and did. But we did, and we're glad. But this is a real Spanish neighborhood. I mean, if you want to perfect your Spanish, this is the place to move, because you're not gonna have any conversations in English, which is just as it should be, of course. Yeah.
What's a house in Albaicin built for?
Oh God. The prices are, even today, very reasonable. Very reasonable. You know, I mean, I can't point to a house there, but you could buy a flat there, or a house there for, I don't know, 300,000. Maybe 400,000. You know, if you want a Carmen, a house with a garden and a view of the Alhambra, and then it's more money. But if you want to just settle there and buy a house there, there are lots for sale. I mean, we were showing and you know, some of them have incredible things like caves. There's a Sacromonte, which is a center for flamenco, which is just adjacent to the Albaicin and kind of continuous with it. We were showing a house that had 2 stories and 5 bedrooms, and then 3 caves, each of which contained 3 caves. So it had 9 caves. It was wonderful. I mean, it was almost irresistible. I still think of wanting to go back and buy it. What's that?
That's where you can put all the kids, you know.
Exactly. And in the summer, you know, in the summer when it's 105 degrees, the caves are just, you know, I mean, they're cool. They're like 68 degrees. It's paradise in those caves. God. Yes.
What type of visas did you have to have, or, you know, is immigration?
It was, you know, the Spanish government is incredible with their visas. You know, you have to, if you're not going to get a job there, if you have a job elsewhere, you have to show them your bank account and you know, prove you have enough money to live on. And of course, if you buy a house, you know, they give you points for that. And they want to see you sort of invested in Spain, but not taking away jobs from any Spaniard. And it's one of those bureaucratic things that you know is, you know, you have to show up with, you know, your entire life in a folder and turn it over to them. And do they look at it? Yeah, maybe they do. But I mean, they had us fill out 25 pages of documents on our dog because we took our dog, and you know, we got there, you know, with our papers in hand, and the workers at the airport swarmed around the cage where our dog was, opened the dog, and took him out to play. They didn't ask us for a thing. We were longing to give them our 25 pages, but no, they couldn't care less. Yeah, so.
So you now live in San Francisco?
What's that?
You live in the Bay Area?
Yeah.
Now, so what's happening to?
We rent the house to visitors.
So we can call you and say,
My email's on my website, you know, just yeah, I mean, we rent it and then but we can block out time and go stay there ourselves, which we do. We still have very close friends there who are very dear to us, so go for it. Yeah.
we're kind of wondering how much do you rent your house out for? Yeah.
Well, discounts for students. Yeah. You have to get in touch. Yeah.
It looks like gardens are infused throughout here.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the wildlife. Are there insects? Are there bees? Is there a great insect population? Are there animals?
There's lots.
What's the environmental in terms of living creatures?
You know, living creatures, lots of birds. Granada's famous for its swifts, vencejos in Spanish. And every morning you get up, this whole neighborhood looks out to the Alhambra. In fact, let me see if... That's what it looks at. That's what this neighborhood looks out on. You see that every night from the Albaicin. So I would say more birds. There's lots of feral cats who can go from the top of the Albaicin all the way to the bottom of the Albaicin and never touch the ground. But not a lot of other wildlife. I would say the Iberian Peninsula. I mean, if you're interested in large mammals and the intense biodiversity of flora and fauna, the Iberian Peninsula is not the place. The Iberian Peninsula, Spain is the size of Nevada, and it has 45 million people, and they've been living there for 2,000 years. I mean, not all 45 million, but it's been continuously inhabited for that long, and it has reduced drastically the biodiversity of the whole peninsula.
And do they grow most of their own food, or do they import most?
It's a very rich agricultural region. So the local food, the local vegetables, it's like, it's like Central California. The food is incredibly good so long as you do a lot of your own cooking. Yeah.
So you talked about like the ancient medicine was very progressive in its time. I'm just wondering, what's the modern medical scene in the area of Granada? Is there a lot of activity there focused on that, or is it something that's not that?
It is. One of our neighbors is a microbiologist who works in a Spanish Scientific Institute. It's EU, it's EU medical standards. So, I mean, there are Germans who go to Spain to have open heart surgery. And the medical system is, it's a government system. It has its problems like all systems, but we found it wonderful. We took our 2-year-old daughter to the local clinic right in the Albaicin, and they treated her. And then we left, and I tried to pay, of course. I'm an American. and the guy looked at me in utter bewilderment. He said, "We don't even have a way to take money." I mean, is that fabulous or what? He says, "We can't take money." And he said, and in any case, we would not refuse to treat any child from anywhere in the world in Spain. Well, I thought, this culture shock of a kind that I could enjoy. Yes?
I'm wondering what in your life was a catalyst to have you come back?
Oh, my. We almost didn't come back. But there were 3 things. I'm deeply tied to the wilderness of the American West and with all its extraordinary biodiversity on every front. And you don't have that in Spain. Our daughter spoke Spanish, but the elementary schools there were much less good than the elementary schools in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we had work that we could easily do in the Bay Area. But it wasn't easy. Let me tell you, we kept delaying. We went there for 2 years, and then 2.5, then 3. How about 3.5? But then we finally decided to come back. So beware if any of you go there. Yeah.
Tell me how well Granada has survived the Spanish recession, because I know a lot of Spanish or Portuguese are emigrating for jobs in Germany or Britain.
Granada has 2 things that in combination, many other cities in Spain cannot match. First of all, they have 3 million people coming to see the Alhambra every year. Right, and that never changed. And the second thing is they have a great university there. So they have a basis that gives them an additional increment of economic stability that other cities don't have. So they've come through remarkably well, I would say. So I mean what I say about you knowing a local. I love the Albaicin, and I love Granada. And if any of you are going there, we have, our 5-page guide of, the secret places to eat and things like that. So I hope some of you, all of you, can travel there and have the delectations of life that are so intense and enveloping there. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and good luck.